Good evening. Welcome to Cypress Creek Baptist Church. I'm Pastor Carl. Tonight we're going to do something a little bit different than we normally do. We're going to have a panel of some of our members and some people that attend our church talking about some racial issues that are occurring in our country. Right now, we're in a time of racial problems in our country, and we're in a time that we need answers, and we need to have open, honest discussions and just talk about stuff. Because when we do that, we hear other people. I think right now, most people are yelling, but nobody's listening. So instead of yelling, instead of shouting each other down, we just want to have a conversation tonight. A time where we can talk about racial issues and how we should proceed and what we should do. The scripture's clear that we're all made in the image of God and that God loves each and every one of us. So tonight, we're going to dig into the racial components and what's going on in our country. So I'm just going to ask some questions. Now, before we get started, I want to introduce everybody to you. If you don't know them, these are people that come to our church. So we have Keith and Barbara Williams. They have two daughters, Kara and Karina, real close friends. They started coming to our church about 6 years ago at Easter, and have been coming ever since. They're in our life group, real close with them. Next to me on my left is Harrison and Brenda Watkins. Now, they started coming right before pandemic, and since pandemic, we all know how that's going. But I have a little bit farther time with them. They were in Hobbs when I was youth pastor there. They went to the church there and recently moved down here to Houston and started coming to our church. But their two daughters went through our youth ministry, Shannon and Kelsey, and he was also my mailman. I always tell that story. Everybody knows that. But he's the one that saved me from all the junk mail. Anyway, leadership team and stuff like that in Hobbs, and we're excited about getting to hear from them. And then the far left is Quentin and Laura Moore. They have two kids, Talon and Taylor, and they've been coming to our church. Now, Quentin's brother-in-law and his sister were youth interns at our church here about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, and spent some time with us, learning about that. And so that's how they got connected. When they moved here, they started coming to our church. So we're going to ask some questions tonight and just let people talk. And hopefully we're going to learn and understand each other better. So let's talk about the first question, guys. The first question that I want to ask you is, what's your opinion? What is racism? How would you answer what is racism?
Well, I think racism would be anytime a group of people look down on any other group because you're not part of them, which is why it tends to be, something that has to do with white people versus black people versus Hispanics, Jewish versus Muslims. So that is where I think racism would stem from. That superiority of I am part of this group and you're not part of it, so you are less.
Okay. Who else? Anybody else? Brenda?
And to add to what he just said, I think that racism is when groups of people make preconceived assumptions about people based mainly on the color of their skin.
Yeah, I think that is essentially what we're talking about tonight. So the next question we go to, and we have to be careful in how we do stuff, especially as a white pastor of a predominantly white church. We have other black families that weren't able to participate in this, but let me ask you guys this question. What is black, or how would you define that?
Well, I think black is when you look at somebody's skin pigmentation, and if it's darker, that you think that's what it is, but it's not necessarily as you think it is. You've got 3 different men up here that we call ourselves African American. We all have a different shade of pigmentation, but we all consider ourselves in one way black.
Right. Anybody else?
And like Harrison said, being black, that's just the norm. I'm not white. I'm not brown. I'm black. When folks see me, they don't see me as brown. They see me as black. Period. No ifs, ands, buts about it.
Yeah. Okay. So, so going through that, the next follow up question is, how do you guys like to be referred to? African American, Black? How would you guys? What would, if somebody was talking to you or about you? How would you like to be referred to?
I would simply accept black man. That is what I refer mostly to. African American. I understand where the phrase comes from. I consider myself American, but as in this scenario that we're discussing, yeah, I would be called a black man for myself.
Okay.
African American or black, there really isn't any preference. I think they both go hand in hand.
Okay, Brenda, what do you think? I mean, what would you like to be referred to as?
Well, I really don't have a preference either, but when filling out paperwork, normally they will have African American on paperwork.
Right.
So I will check that or whatever, but I have no problem with being called a black woman.
Okay.
Yeah, and the same goes for me. On paperwork, it usually says black / and or African American. I've never been to Africa, so I'm an American, so it is what it is. I'm black.
Okay. Okay.
I prefer to actually be called just an American.
Yeah.
Amen.
Agreed.
Yeah. And I think that gets biased a lot of times. I mean, that's a divide, but really we're all just American and stuff. So, okay. So, how has stereotyping affected you guys? Can you share with us how stereotyping has affected you guys?
I guess when you maybe get stopped by the police or when you go into a department store to have somebody looking at you to determine if you're there to actually purchase something or if you're there to rob them.
Okay. Yeah.
I am a 20+ year technical support IT professional. So I spend a lot of my time on the phone. No one really sees me. And a lot of the stereotype comes with me when I'm discussing or helping someone over the phone. They perceive me as anything else but a black person. I have had plenty of very uncomfortable conversations with some customers making statements to me, thinking one way, and they don't know that either A, I am a black man, B, I'm married to a white woman, or C, that I have other ethnicities in my family. So when they speak with me, they feel they have too much of an assumption just because of my mannerisms.
Right. Right. Okay.
And I have also experienced that when I speak, they say you don't sound like a black person. So that's a stereotype. And
Right.
there are many other instances that I have been stereotyped. I mean, you can get into the whole thing about what you eat, how you dressed, how you sound. It's just basic things like that that I've experienced. Our children have experienced stereotypes. As even when it comes to doing well in school, sometimes you're not expected to do as well as others, and they were. I mean, in high level classes, they all did well in school educationally, and I did well as myself. And sometimes, you're just not expected to be that kind of a person. And to
Yeah.
me, that is a negative stereotype.
Right. Right.
And like Brenda and Q said about stereotypes, you don't sound like a black man. You sound different. So I get that all the time. And then when I do presentations or speaking engagements, they're shocked to see that, oh, Keith, you're actually black. You speak well. Where did that come from? You speak great English. Really? Yeah. Well, I was taught in school how to speak, so I understand that.
And so, how does that stereotyping make you guys, like when stuff like that happens? What do you think and how do you feel?
Well, they're prejudging me that this black kid can't, what is he doing up there, speaking like that? What does he know? Well, I actually know a lot because, or I wouldn't be up here speaking. So
I think it's like putting everything in to one bowl and saying it's all that. As they would say, don't put all your eggs in one basket. It was like, well, maybe just put all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, yeah.
I act in the exact opposite of the stereotype that we're going over. You have this view of me. People see me. They don't know that I grew up for 10 plus years in Camden, New Jersey, which was rated as the highest murder rate location in the U.S. for the time frame. I was like one of those kids. I ran the streets. I was getting in trouble, but I don't act hood. I don't act ghetto. So you never see that about me, and that stereotype is part of a world that I deal with too as well.
Yeah.
But those who know me back then, they're like, "Oh yeah, Quentin, he's been out here all the time. He knows this place really well." So
Yeah, that stereotype of you are this, so you must be that. And just like white people, anybody else, black people go from one side of the spectrum to the very other side. But racism says this is who you are if you're that. And so it hurts you. So have you guys faced racism personally?
I would say yes in one part and then no in a part because when you think about affirmative action, then some people would say, oh, well, you were given an advantage, but I think I created my own advantage. Also, when it comes to maybe being stopped or profiled in a store, sometimes I'm not looking for that. I've been stopped here in Houston 3 times and I think I felt more maybe attacked by the black policeman than I did by the 2 white policemen that stopped me.
Wow. And so it doesn't stop just because you get pulled over by a black officer. It can be just as bad that way. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think it can probably be worse because some black officers, I guess, when they stop, they're expecting you to look at them and say, "Hey, man, bro," and instead of addressing them as sir and being respectful.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Anybody else?
For me, yeah, I've actually had I've been fortunate. My generation is I love my generation, very person centric. So they're less about the color, more about the people that they deal with, which is, you look at our generation looks and we see a person who's racist and we look at them like beta tapes, like they still make you? They're still here? But it's a thing still. We're just trying to push it out. For me, I've actually been on both sides of the equation where I've been referred to. I've had the N-word thrown at me before. I've been called an Uncle Tom before. I have had issues where people didn't like me or I couldn't date someone because their parents wouldn't accept me. And I've missed out on opportunities with people. But I've also had a lot of people who were the exact opposite of that in my life. I have very close friends. My best friend is a short little Irish guy who's very scrappy that if I ever got into a fight, I would want him at my back. So, I've experienced a very large plethora of that pull, but in a very isolated environment that it didn't really overly affect me. And I'm thankful for that in a great way.
Yeah. Because when racism happens, you could hate the people that are racist towards you. And the hate is where racism comes from. And that's the identity behind racism, is just hating somebody that's not like you. So when you face it, it's awesome that you were able to deal with it in a way that didn't cause you to have hate all the time for the people that were against you. Yeah. And as we see, we have biracial couples, and that's a whole different issue. So let's move on to another question. How do you approach racism in your family? In y'all's family, how do you guys deal with racism?
So I think in our family, the girls, especially now that they're getting into high school, is experiencing where they're not being accepted by either side. So either they're not black enough or they're not white enough. So we have to have conversations with them about, finding the right friends and finding the right people and trusting in God that everything will work out.
Yeah. Who else?
That's it's not, racism isn't something that's come across in our family just yet with our kids because our kids are still small. But Talon's getting to an age where they'll make subtle differences. They'll notice that Quentin's skin color is darker than my skin color. So we'll address it on a age appropriate level. But again, bring it always back to, well, that's the way God made you. We're made to look just like he looks, and he looks like you, and he looks like me, and he looks like y'all, and he looks like everybody else. So we keep it very age appropriate. But I wasn't prepared for your answer.
That's life, and that's how life
It
is sometimes.
It is.
When you start having these discussions, something hits you you're not prepared for, and that's what's important to have these discussions. Quentin, you guys,
Right. There's no manual at all.
Right.
I try to keep things because unfortunately there isn't as much information, about the history for Black people and how much we've put into this nation to make it a thing. So I try to include things like Remember the Titans and Red Tails, these movies that are
Hidden
age
Figures.
appropriate, exactly.
Love that movie.
So that
Yeah.
he can see, so that both Talon and Taylor can see, that there's been there's been contributions. Thank you. On both sides, all sides. This nation is built from all of us, and you have just as much stake on your dad's side as it came from your mom's side, whether you hear about it or not.
Isn't it funny how we're called a racial melting pot, but yet we have racial problems? Isn't that hilarious? Brandon, what were you
And
saying?
I was going to point out that racism isn't experienced just with Black, white, Hispanic groups, because we dealt with some of it from our own, Black people. They tended to think that we were uppity because we wanted better, because we were educated. Our kids did so well in school. We're kind of like standouts. And we lived on the north side of town because we wanted better. And we experienced a lot of backlash from our own Black people.
Right. So you're talking about the same thing that she's talking about.
Yes.
You're
In
not Black
reverse.
enough. You're not white enough to fit in with people.
Well, this was more of, you've left your Black race and you're moving on and you're trying to be white.
Right.
That sort of idea. But it wasn't that. It was just that we wanted better as a family, and we worked hard to get what we had.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
that's another point that people don't think about.
Yeah. So I mean, this is a great discussion, because I think when you start thinking about this stuff, it makes you aware of the differences we have. Just like Lauren hearing Barbara's answer and going, "Wow!" I mean, because their kids are older than your kids, so that's just down the road. So let's bring this back to our church. How does racism affect the church? In a corporate body, in our church, we're predominantly white. We have a number of Black families or interracial families. We have a number of Hispanic families. How do you think racism affects the church?
I think it gets kind of passed over, cover up a little bit, unless something really comes up that makes somebody have to have an interaction with somebody else.
Like what's going on right now?
Right.
Yeah. So it gets ignored. Is that a good thing or a bad thing that it gets ignored?
Well, I don't think it's a bad thing. Well, it's in between.
Yeah.
Because you try and cover it up and then it comes out. So with myself, we've been here 6 years now, going to Cypress Creek Baptist Church, and I'm friendly. So if you come up to me, I'll talk to you. I attend the contemporary service, but I'll go over to the traditional service and let them know that I'm here for you too. So, whether they like that or not is another thing, but it's who I am, and you take me or don't like me, that's fine. But
He's friends with
this is-
everybody.
This is who I am, so take it or leave it.
Yeah. Yeah. Who else? What is the church? How's the church affected? Is it good or bad, or is ignoring it good or bad? What do y'all think? I mean,
Well, I think we're all God's children. So when we're in the church, we have one common denominator, and that is Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And I think when we come, we kind of put some of that aside to worship.
And I didn't say this, but Harrison's dad was a pastor in Hobbs, and so he's seen this also from that side. Yeah, and do you guys? Would you guys, if somebody come up to you and ask you questions, how would you handle that? I mean, and I'm talking about racial questions about who you are. Would you accept that? Or would you like it, or would it make you uncomfortable at church?
I would personally like it. You know, I like one to be able to have those open conversations. One of my good friends is an atheist, and him and I, we have these kind of open conversations about God, but we have them in a respectful manner. He knows I'm not going to push on him. I know that he's just venting what he believes on his side, and I like having those kind of conversations because I can't become a better person without having more information about how you're thinking, what you
Right.
go through. You know, that's the whole basis in the Bible as far as I've always touched on. You know, Paul's major thing is the fact that he gets what it means to be forgiven because of the fact that he's been on the other side where he thought he was right only to find out he was doing it wrong. Same thing with Peter, same thing with Job, same thing. So a lot of understanding comes from the conversation. So I want people to ask me the questions and know that I'm not going to shun you or belittle you when you come with me these questions that are very important for you to have the courage to come up to me and ask. I want to be able to help because knowledge is what's going to make us move past.
Right.
Patience is where love meets wisdom. And if you don't put the wisdom part of it into it, all you're doing is just accepting you on a shell. And that's not all of you.
Right.
I also think that if you don't ask the question, then you never get the answer.
Right. Right. And I think personally a lot of people are scared to ask because we love each other and we don't want to offend each other, but at the same time, if we don't ask, we don't know. Yeah, who else is gonna?
So, from the other side, being that you're saying that you do want people to come up and ask the question, what is the best way for someone to come up and ask that question? Is it I don't want to offend, but I'm curious, or is it I just want to know what? I guess the question is, how would you like to be asked?
It doesn't matter to me. I mean, if you just come up to me and ask me, I'll give you an answer. Whether you want to hear that answer or not
And
is
that's
another
true
question.
because I've asked.
Right, exactly.
I'm just a direct
Right.
person. I've come to Keith and
Yep.
said, "Hey, tell me about this. What's up with this?" And I try when I've done that, and I
Mhm.
hope I haven't offended Keith, and I don't think I have.
Well,
Here he goes. But when I've done that, he's been very open and honest to give me an answer because I think that open conversations like this are so good for us to really hear and let somebody express their heart. But like we've said, if we don't ask, we don't know. So when I approached Keith, I just said, "Hey, Keith, I want to ask you a question." And I did it when we were by ourselves.
Mhm.
So I didn't put him on the spot, But yeah,
I think also what we experienced, because when we were at Temple, we were the only really black couple
Mhm.
there. So, it's obvious, we're obvious, but, we were made to feel very welcome. So to me, that replaced any of the negative thoughts that could crop up because we were openly accepted and everybody treated us very well. So that kind of neutralized all the negative questions
And the
or thoughts.
anxiety and
Yes, yes,
yeah.
yes.
And I think that when we as a church love people for who they are, that's not even where God's at. He loves us no matter where we are. You know what I'm saying? Like we sing as little kids, red and yellow, black and white, and you can include brown or orange. We say that, but then we're scared to have these conversations, and we're scared to really talk about tough issues. But yet the church, we challenge people with heaven and hell all the time, which is a tough issue, and we've got to, I don't want to make bad, give you guys, y'all are going to be every service now, you're going to be people inundate you with questions and stuff. But I do want to open a dialogue about how things.
I did want to make a clarification. I didn't mean to say that we were the only black couple ever going to Temple.
Yeah, yeah.
Because, they had several young people going in
Yeah.
your department, and there were a few couples that attended here and there, but we were like
Yeah,
the stable ones.
We had, yeah. We
the
probably
ones that
had-
went often.
Right.
So-
We had probably I'm trying to think of her name. Johnson. I can't think of her name.
Witherspoon?
Witherspoon. Yeah, Sharon Witherspoon.
Yes.
Sharon, but she was
Witherspoon.
married to a white guy.
Yes, she was married to a
And
white
then,
guy. And her two
Luann
children,
and
yes.
and Raquel and Sean
Mhm.
and Danielle
Yeah.
that went to our youth department. There was probably we were between 30 and 50 the whole time I was there, and a lot of the time it was a third black, a third
Yeah.
white, and a third Hispanic, which was so
Yeah.
awesome because we didn't have and being that we didn't have, I don't think I ever dealt with, well, the white kids are mad at the black kids, or
Yeah,
we just didn't
yeah.
have that. And they hung out, and it wasn't just black kids hanging out. It was mixing and finding out who people are personally. And that's what makes the difference, I think.
Yeah, it was a very unique situation.
Yeah.
Now, I think a lot of the racism comes more from the adults than from kids.
Okay.
Because you're an adult and you should know better. But the adults make more of an issue out of it than kids. Kids get together and play, and they really don't see color. They really don't see gender. They just want to play, have a good time. As adults, it seems like all of a sudden now we have to start figuring out if we're better than somebody else. If I've got more money, a bigger house, a car, a better job. Then even as an adult, we start looking at skin tone, pigmentation. But deep down, it really doesn't matter because it's a matter of what you have up here and what you have in your heart.
Right. So let me ask you guys another question. Let's get down to some of the real differences here. When you get pulled over by a police officer, I'm scared because I don't want a ticket and I don't want my insurance to go up. Right? Do you guys does that make you feel different? What's your thoughts when you get pulled over? Is it more about safety, or how does that go?
Well, for me, it's both. I don't want to get a ticket. You learn not to make sudden movements, especially like bending down. You want to keep your hands on the wheel, but also if the police officer asks you a question, you want to, look him in the eye and be able to give him a straight answer.
Yeah. So.
Yes, I have a very specific regimen that I go through. I don't get pulled over often, and I'm an avid believer that if I'm pulled over, I've done something wrong. Because you wouldn't be bothered with me unless I did something. But then there's a little tingle in the back of my head of always, well, maybe I didn't because I'm here, and the South is infamous for some pretty unwelcoming stereotypes at times, So I've often used to turn off my radio for what I'm listening to onto my Christian station. I would put my hands on the steering wheel, have the license registration already ready, and it's like you said, it's a respectful answer, straight tone, no sudden movements, and it boggles my mind sometimes the audacity that some people who with police that have the audacity to talk back or even go as far as throw things at the police or stuff like that. I could never fathom that because the other half of the equation, I'm trying to go home. I have
Right.
people who are looking for me, so I want to be on my best behavior when I go. It's something I deal with. I don't
Do you
know.
fear for your safety though?
Yes, it happens a little bit more often than I'd like to admit because I know police officers and I know that there are a lot of good cops. And I support every police officer in every scenario because they're doing a job that I couldn't even fathom trying to do. But then I've always been taught, people are people. You know, you're dealing with the person. You're dealing with what happened that day, what's going on in their mind, their personal belief system, the things that they're thinking about in last interaction. And I don't want that information plus the fact that of a stereotype that's stigma on to me to further escalate it and make it something that it didn't have to be just because of me being a black person.
Right.
Period.
Right.
And again, I think that males deal with that differently than females. I haven't been pulled over often, but the one time, but I was scared out of my wits, just not because of fear for, being harassed by a police officer. I was just terrified for getting pulled over. So I can't say that I did anything in particular out of fear for my life. So it was just fear, period.
Yeah.
Yeah, fear is right. So probably a couple years ago, I got pulled over up north in Texas and was talking to my wife, and of course I blamed her for speeding, and I got pulled over and was like, I was respectful, had my license and registration, insurance card ready at the wheel, but it was just before Christmas. I'm in a college town. Can you give a brother a break? And the officer was not white, not black, Hispanic, and no, the brother did not give me a break. But it's lessons learned. Don't be a leadfoot. That's
yeah.
all.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also think that sometimes you get pulled over. A lot of times you be looking to say, what did I did wrong? But sometimes they're out there and maybe your vehicle might match somebody that's done something wrong. The last time I did get pulled over, it wasn't nothing that I had done wrong. It was just that the police officer couldn't read my license plate, that it faded real bad. So me knowing that I had a good license plate, and I knew what the license plate read, but from a distance, once I got out of my vehicle and looked at it, I realized why he was stopping me, because he made it known that, what state is that from? And I put New Mexico, and, you really had to walk up on it and look up on it to tell that's where it was from. So, sometimes it's not nothing that you're doing wrong, but it's just some of the predicaments that you can put yourself in while you're driving.
Right. Right. Okay, let me ask you another question, especially to you guys. As an interracial couple, do y'all find it hard to talk to your in-laws about racial issues?
I personally do. Not because I don't feel that they would be interested, but because they don't come and inquire with me and with specific things. When we first got together, her mother had questions all the time, and they were always comical questions. It's like she was genuinely like, "Is this something that happens?" Kind of scenario, like talk about like perfect example. Her mother, my in-law, was shocked I got sunburned, and she was just surprised, genuinely surprised. Now, mind you, I was too, because I've never gotten sunburned before. But my surprise was different than hers. So they have an interest in knowing, but they don't come to the direct, immediate family source to inquire, which makes me wonder, is there something I'm doing that's making them feel uncomfortable to ask me? Is there something that they have about the question that they don't want to ask me? Is there an uncomfortability about just in general? And I know my family, my side of the family is pretty tight-lipped about racial issues too, outside of their immediate family too as well. But that's a Black community thing, and it's something that we don't really talk openly and outwardly about until it becomes something big,
Yeah.
and then it becomes an issue.
Right.
But it's always a conversation in the house in different scapes, but it's not a conversation that I have with my in-laws, and I would like to have more so that there can be an understanding, because we talk about all the time, God accepts us all for who we are because he accepts the person, not the thing. And we forget the fact that our God is all powerful, so he knows all things, so he knows all of you, which is why he can accept and understand and know what you're doing, because you're not hiding anything. The rest of us, we've got to ask.
Right.
If we don't ask, we can't become same level understanding where we can look past and look inward. It's all mystery to us. And I think that's something that I would like to have more with my in-laws.
So God's all knowing, but we're not.
Oh, shocker.
Right. Right. Huh? Who would have thunk that? We need to ask questions to get information. What'd you guys?
And that's so true, because where Barb grew up, town of 10,000, and I think they had one black family, the Hightowers. So I know a little bit of history about Merrill, Wisconsin. But to this day, I'm not sure how her parents felt about me being a black male taking their white daughter away.
Yeah.
So that's just my thought. My mom is pretty open with my brother's married to a Puerto Rican, so that was kind of the first thing. And then I bring home a white lady, a white young woman to the mix, and my dad, we grew up in Connecticut, so it was kind of a hodgepodge of Jamaicans, Italians, Puerto Ricans, Haitians. So we had a hodgepodge of folks in the city that I lived in. So I just knew it as the norm. Everyone's hey, they're cool, so I'm cool too. But on Barb's end.
So, yeah, I think with my family initially, we met 20 plus years ago. So when we were dating, I think it was a little more challenging. But my mother's side of the family, actually, there is an interracial couple, but they just live a couple hours away. So I think now, though, it's very accepting, and there's not any issues there or anything that's brought up as the family has matured. For me, with his family, and I was around his family more first because we were in the same town. His family was very open. There's not really discussions about actual racism or it more politics than anything, and we do differ on that. So I think that's where maybe some things do come out is from those kind of conversations than necessarily just racism.
Yeah.
So I haven't had the conversations really on either side, and that's kind of hitting me now, making me kind of wonder why. But thankfully, his sister and I are extremely close. The same with our brother-in-law, and so if there are questions that I do have that either I can't or don't want to ask Quentin, I have an outlet. I have another source to go to. Like you said, his family is very close knit, and it's just not a conversation that we have within the in-laws.
Okay. So anything else? Oh, go ahead. Brenda.
I was just going to say that even though we are not, an interracial couple, but our son dated, a white girl, and I can remember her family not accepting him right away until they found out who I was. And then they said, oh, he's the son of, the good blacks. So that's another example of how that stereotyping ties into almost every facet of living. So when they found out he was part of a good black family, it all changed, and we got to be very close and all of that. But see, it shouldn't be based on that.
Right.
So that's what I meant about
And
how stereotyping, how deep it goes.
Yeah. And stereotyping is something we all do.
Mhm.
As much as you try and stop it, we all do it, because what we do as people, we try and make connections to what we're familiar with. But that's sometimes a stereotype. I knew this family and they were a good family, so everybody's like that. And you can be taken advantage of like that if you stereotype, or you can, think somebody's bad when they're not just because you're stereotype of perceived things. But
Well, one thing I would like to say about that is some family members don't bring things up, but I'm talking with my older sisters and going back through our personal family history. I had a grandmother that was white,
really,
right? And you know, we both look around and we talk about interracial, but you have some grandparents that great grandparents that probably dead and gone on, but your family members don't talk about them, so you really don't know. That's why when people do DNA testing,
yeah,
they kind of go into shock
Yep.
because all of a sudden they think that they were Italian, something like this, and then the DNA test comes back and it shows, oh, this 2% African, 2%, 3% Italian, and you start having questions about where their percent came in.
Well,
And-
Bailey, our daughter, did one of the DNA tests for Christmas or birthday. We did it, and she was 2% from North Africa, somewhere in North Africa.
oh, so you're black.
I am. No, my kids are for some reason.
Right.
My kids are. I wish I was. I need some more color, but that's true. Now in the scientific age we are, nobody is white or black. We are a mix of everything. And of course, biblically, we came from Adam and Eve or Noah's kids and their family. We're all descending from those, biblically speaking. And so there's not as much difference as we want to believe. There's really not. So has anybody got anything you want to add to this?
One thing I would add, we're talking about racism, but there's only one race, and that's the human race.
Right.
Amen. And we're all Americans, not African American, not Italian American, not Hispanic American. We're all Americans.
You're either American or you're not.
Amen.
Right? Anybody else have anything they want to add? Yeah, Quentin.
Yep. And I would just like to say that, again, my invitation to come and ask me any questions is open. I enjoy the conversations, and I would love to get to know more people here anyway, because I've only really seen so many people from the contemporary service. I haven't seen anybody from traditional service except for those who came on the couples retreat. And I'd like to get to know a lot more people better. So I have a personal anxiety issue, and that would help.
Yeah. Well, anybody else? Well, I like to thank you guys for joining us this evening and having these conversations. Maybe this is going to lead to another conversation, and maybe it's going to lead to another panel where we talk about more things. And maybe you got questions and you need to go talk to Quentin or Keith or somebody up here, or maybe you're not. Why don't you get with me, and then maybe we could sometime do this again and just take some more questions, because I really think that the more we know. When I was a kid, there was a little kids TV show. Knowledge is power, right? Knowledge is power. And so that's what we need to do, is we need to have more conversations like this. But thanks for joining us. If there's something we can do for you, we love to minister to people. We don't care who you are. God loves you, and so do we.